2 weeks. 2. That's the amount of time that I give myself to rank and review knives like this We Knife Company Arrakis, designed by the late great Isham and manufactured by We Knife Company. And normally my ranking system works great. It's got 5 categories, there's scoring for each category, and at the end we add up all the points, and then we put it on our public leaderboard for the world to see, so that you have the context that you need to decide if this deserves to be in your pocket, if it deserves to be in your display case. 2 weeks. This time it wasn't quite so easy. Right when I think that I have this knife figured out, I start to look at it from a different angle and I change my opinion. And then I carry it a different way, put it in my pocket a different way, look at it a different way, and the opinion changes once again. Which is why we are past the 2-week mark. However, I've committed to a score. It's time that we rank this bad boy because it honestly deserves it. The only question left for me to answer is the We Knife Company Arrakis a Grail? Or is it garbage? Alright guys, so as I mentioned in my intro, I've kind of been putting off ranking this knife, and it's not because I don't want to give it a rank, I absolutely do. It's because every time I think I've got it locked down, something happens and I change my mind. I look at it differently, I hold it differently, I put it in my pocket, you know, it sits on my desk, I look at it, I fidget with it, I check the action, and then my opinion changes. And then I think I got it locked down finally, and then a new interesting development happened. You see, turns out when I did my original video on this, it was in fact marked as discontinued all over the internet, which didn't surprise me since the designer Isham, and yes, it is Isham, not Isham or Isham, I have confirmed, since he had passed away tragically, you know, it made sense that this would get discontinued. I'm not sure if there is a new stock of these available somewhere or something, but all of a sudden they're no longer marked as discontinued on websites that they were marked as discontinued on. So maybe some bad communication there from the manufacturer. Maybe they just stumbled across a manufactured trove of these things that had been sitting in storage that they didn't realize had been in storage. So yeah, it's time for me to give this a rank. If you're not familiar with how my ranking system works, here's how it goes. We have 5 categories. The categories are materials, ergonomics, fidget factor, the lock, and then of course, fit and finish. Each category is worth a max of 10 points, at the end of which we will add up all the categories' points and then place it on our leaderboard. Now, once we do that, it's set in stone until the end of the year, and we're approaching quickly because you see it is November 25th at the time of recording this, and the end of the year is nigh. It's 30 days away, give or take. So stay tuned for that, because I'm going to be giving the community the opportunity to vote on knives, and the ones that actually get votes are going to get a community score so you guys can say your piece. So let's go ahead, stop dilly-dallying, and give this a rank. So the first category is materials. Now, materials is based heavily on what it costs, and this was part of the difficulty that I had in ranking this, because when knives are discontinued, I can't in good faith base it on the value, because if there are any left, then in that case, it's just going to be, are you willing to pay the price for the design or aren't you? Versus a knife that's not discontinued or is readily available and in stock, which is, you know, then you have the opportunity to decide if you want to wait or not, or if you want to try to find one on the secondhand market. And so lo and behold, when I found out that these were not in fact marked as discontinued any longer, it kind of messed with my score, because, you know, at the end of the day, I was thinking about it and I was like, well, you know, if it's discontinued, I can give it a higher score for the premium materials. And then on the other hand, I was like, well, you know what? It's no longer marked as discontinued. There's still premium materials, but does the price justify it? And that's a question that is worth answering when you're looking at whether or not you want to recommend this knife or how high you want to place it on that leaderboard. So here's what I came up with. And in case you're wondering what these materials are, that's probably a good place to start. We have a titanium frame, and it's an integral. This is not something that I mentioned before, but it is in fact an integral. And the carbon fiber on this knife is actually kind of like an overlay. I won't call it an inlay because it's not inset, but it's an overlay. This carbon fiber overlay over this skeletonized titanium frame is insanity. And by the way, if you're not a huge fan of having carbon fiber on your knife, they do actually make a full titanium version of this, which is like $5 or $6 cheaper. I've seen them on Knife Center. You can actually do the pre-order for like $296, which is insanity to me. But you know what? The fact that you can get full tie on this for $296, I think is pretty good. On the blade steel, we're looking at M390. Beautiful DLC coating on here, which is a beautiful matte finish, and it doesn't collect fingerprints. Look at that. Are you freaking kidding me? No fingerprints. So many of my knives that I put in my display case, they collect fingerprints like a madman, and then I have to wipe them off, but I also want to carry them, and then, you know, I'm stuck wiping them off again and some more, and yeah, you get the picture. So yeah, we're looking at titanium integral, titanium pocket clip. Because it's an integral, I mean, it's better than a backspacer. It's all one piece with a carbon fiber overlay and M390. These are premium materials, no matter which way you split it. Now, typically when we get in the $300 price range, these materials don't automatically score it super high because, you know, at that price range, I expect these premium materials. However, given that the recent price drops have been around the $300 range, and given that we can't really necessarily have faith that these are going to stay in stock, even with the pre-order going down, we just have to, like, honestly, materials, I don't know how you can get any better than this. I mean, what steel is going to be considered on a higher level? Not just better. Better is a matter of opinion, but on a higher tier, higher level than M390. Like knives that cost $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 have titanium and carbon fiber. So when you look at it, you know, outside of the vacuum of the $300 price point and the fact that it was manufactured in China, and you just take it in as the materials that are on there, I can't help but give it a 9 out of 10. Especially with the reduced price of around $300 or $295. I think at the lowest I saw on the pre-orders for a full tie was $291. So yeah, those materials are pretty damn good. I mean, like, you just can't get better, okay? I'm rambling. Materials gonna come in at a 9 out of 10. Now we need to talk about the next one, and this one is going to be kind of a hot topic on this knife because of how unique it looks. And I'm going to say unique and not weird because it's not weird. The longer you look at this knife, the more it makes sense. Kind of like if you're looking at a kaleidoscope. Stay with me here. So the ergonomics, you have these lines that are angular and yet soft at the same time. And they swoop and then jut out and then they curve off. And unlike the predecessor of this knife, the eschaton, this one actually does have a blade shape that makes sense. And I say it makes sense, so like ergonomically, stay with me here. The handle scale curves over like that, and that fits in your palm. So from this angle, that's great. There's a swoop and a swell at the spine of the blade, which your thumb actually naturally rests in, which is also great. Now, here's where it gets a little weird. So this part is actually comfortable, but it's almost a little too short. Now you'll say, well, you know, what about that finger cut out there? Because it looks like you could do this. And you know what? You can. But the design of this knife is almost like it's encouraging you not to do dumb stuff with it. I can't help but reference an Elijah Isham video where he batons with a eschaton. And it completely destroys the liner lock, as it should. These are not hard use knives. If you're like, oh, I can't buy this anymore because, you know what, I want to do some bushcrafting with it, save yourself the time and the money and go get a knife that's built for that, that's meant for that, because that's not what this was meant for. And the ergonomics suggests, to me at least, that he was encouraging that, because you can, in fact, get a comfortable grip on this blade if you're okay with this, which is going to be like, hey, you know what? Go ahead and open your cardboard boxes. You know what? Go ahead and do your draw cuts, slice open the envelope, cut some thread on your clothing. This is a knife that you want to show off. This is a knife that's a conversation piece, and the ergonomics 100% suggests that. There's no sharp edges on this whatsoever. Everything is nicely milled and nicely rounded out. Even when it comes down to these cutouts, while it's not extremely knocked down or rounded off on these edges, they're also not cutting my finger when I run my fingers across them. So for those reasons, I'm not going to give it a terrible score for the ergonomics. Originally, I had this scoring much lower, but the more I looked at it and the more I thought about the reasoning behind why it's shaped the way that it is, the encouragement to do something that includes more thought really got to me. And so for those reasons, it's going to get a 7 out of 10 for ergonomics. Next up, we have what is quite possibly my favorite category, and based on the comments in the last Grail or Garbage, a lot of your favorite category too, and that's going to be Fidget Factor. Now, Fidget Factor is not just about how many options does it have for me to flip this out and flick it out and do all this other stuff. All the options in the world don't make beans worth of sense if it's not something that you actually want to play with. And what I love about Fidget Factor is that Fidget Factor kind of combines both the lock category as well as the ergonomics category, because if it's not comfortable enough to hold in the hand, it's also not comfortable enough to play with. And on top of that, if it's not going to have a lock that's easy to engage and disengage, that also plays into the ergonomics and also plays into your ability to play with it. The other factors involved are detent strength, so how easily does it flip out, as well as the action on the return. So it's running on ceramic bearings, and look at this action. It's drop shut, but it's a controlled drop shut, and it's silent. It's silent, and you can feel how smooth this is. Now, here's the thing. This was a knife that was lent to me for review by a viewer. He tells me that he has not lubed this pivot whatsoever. That's impressive, given how smooth this is. Had he not told me that, I would have 100% believed that this had been lubed with KPL beforehand, because it feels like it's running on greasy glass. And I know that image in your head probably doesn't look the greatest, but trust me when I say that it feels the greatest. And this is quite possibly one of the smoothest actions that I have felt on a knife. It's up there, and I can tell you that the action feels like a knife that costs 4 or 5 times as much. That's ridiculous. It absolutely kills it in the action department, and that makes me want to fidget with it. Furthermore, the detent is not super strong, but it's also really not easy to fail. I mean, that's a light press right there, and if you give it more juice, it'll fly out even better. It's not a super heavy blade, which means that you're not going to get a lot of recoil on the return, it's also not going to be guillotine drop shot, which some people like, but I'm not necessarily a huge fan of. But is it fun to fidget with? Absolutely. I find myself fidgeting with this thing every time that I pick it up, and that's just phenomenal to me. I love the action, the feeling of the action returning to the blade, and the blade returning to the handle scales rather, is really, really honestly quite good. And that alone is worth its weight in gold, which, is to say that it doesn't weigh a whole lot for integral titanium and carbon fiber overlay. I'll list the weight up here on the screen. I'll let you decide if it's too much for that. So for those reasons, the Fidget gets a extremely solid 8 out of 10. Moving on to the lock. Now, I mentioned that this is an integral, which means that it has to be a frame lock. And when you add the fact that it has these carbon fiber overlays on it, those are really nice. See, the biggest weakness that I find in a frame lock actually comes from the fact that it's really easy to put too much pressure on the frame when you go to flick it out. And then, of course, you regret it because you can't flick it. No matter how hard you try, you just can't because you're working against yourself. And that's a frustrating thing to experience. I experienced it with a Chavez knife at the very, very early start of this channel, and it kind of ticked me off, to be honest with you. In this case, because of those overlays, that's not an issue. Another thing to bring in mind when we're talking about the lock is how easy is it to engage and disengage? Well, because of how it's scalloped out, it's actually not hard to engage or disengage at all. And when we look at the lockup on here, the lockup is rather early. I would say that's probably about 20%. Looking in here, and here's the thing, the lockup is kind of hard to see because it's back in there. Lockup's going to be about 20, we'll call it 23%. So it is kind of early, but it's not an issue. There is no blade play. Blade play, what is that? How do you even spell that? Up and down, pivot lash? Nah, none of that. And when you're spending a couple $100, it shouldn't. To be honest with you, when you get in the multiple hundreds of dollars range, that's nonsense that should be left to the budget knives, the sub $100 knives. It's not as impressive to me to have a knife that doesn't have pivot lash or lock rock or lock stick when you're spending multiple hundreds of dollars on knives. But it still surprises me when I find knives in the $200-300 range that do have those issues. By the way, at this point, if you are thinking of a knife that you've experienced in that range that has those issues, pop it in the comment section down below. Let the community know what did you dirty. Seriously. Anyways, I'm kind of getting away from myself here. No issues with the lock whatsoever. It's a nice lockup. Would I trust it to baton with? No. But, again, Isham Blade Works Instagram is still up, and you can still watch the video where he batons with an eschaton, and that liner lock failed. But he still was able to baton with it. It's just an example of something you shouldn't do with this knife. And so, does it work for the purpose that this was meant for, which is going to be light cutting tasks, showing off to your friends, having a conversation piece and a piece that ultimately looks fantastic in your display case? Yeah, the lock works extremely well for that. The centering on it's also good. So there's no issues with the lock. It's honestly a really, really good frame lock, and you'll find that very frequently with integral designs is that the frame locks are very good. But furthermore, that frame lock seamlessly matches the other side, which is really cool. And it also helps with that detent, because the detent is also attached to that frame lock. So I'm rambling. I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10 for the lock. Now, guys, to me, it's only been a few minutes. To you, it's been at least 17. And we're on the last category. The last category is going to be fit and finish. Now, fit and finish is not just how well manufactured it is. That's a big part of it for sure. But it's also about how well executed the design is. And if there's one thing that Elijah Isham has always done, it's make sure that his designs are well executed, whether it's something that he did himself or something that he passed on to a manufacturer like We. Now, We Knife Company is known for having some of the best fit and finish in the game. They leave the design up to him, and then they make it a reality, and that really follows through here. The skeletonized design of this is absolutely stunning. The transition from titanium to carbon fiber with the cutouts, and then to M390, keeping that design flow perfectly in line, is absolutely gorgeous. Something that I hadn't considered in my initial video is the fact that this is an integral, which is even more difficult, and it takes more processing and machining time to do well. That's great. The only sharp edges on here is the edge that should be sharp. That's the blade. The lock itself is an easy part for people to screw up when it comes to how well scalloped and chamfered out it is. And it's not uncomfortable at all. This knife has never made my thumbs unhappy. And to do that and also maintain the design flow from left to right is absolutely phenomenal. Speaking of which, the pocket clip, which I haven't mentioned a whole lot of yet, is not obnoxious. It's actually subtle and understated. The 3D milled pocket clip fits in extremely well. And it's a part that's really easy for a lot of manufacturers and a lot of designers to screw up because they just overdo it or they underdo it and they undersell it. That is not an issue with this knife whatsoever. You see, it's almost easy to forget that it's there because it flows with the design so well. For all we know, this could be the show side, but it's not. This is the show side. And it doesn't look like you're missing anything when you are looking at the clip side because it's an effortless continuation of a great design. Being able to see the blade through the scales is something that I think is cool. I've seen other iterations and different designs that don't look as good as this or even close. And then you consider the back end of this. This could have been a big detractor because when it's sticking out of your pocket, you have this much sticking out, which means you go in to reach in. But here's the thing, I can press a finger or my palm down on that, and while it's not super comfortable, it's not, it's also not uncomfortable because that tip is very well rounded off. And the clip matches that tip perfectly. So yeah, a whole lot of really good things to talk about, especially considering that the only thing you have to really do to take this apart is just take off these overlays. And because it's an integral, you take off the overlays and you take off the clip and you unscrew the pivot and boom, you're done. And of course it has a single-sided locked in pivot, which I think is phenomenal because why unscrew 2 screws when you can unscrew 1? Why? The thought process behind ceramic bearings kind of speaks for itself. Ceramic bearings are extremely smooth and it shows in this knife. And the more I hold it, the more I think about just how much design went into this. To get the aesthetic to match and line up so perfectly and then also function while opening and closing with perfect centering, that blade centering is perfect. Everything on here was thought out. And while I know that there's going to be some people out there that think that this is a gas station knife because a knife shouldn't have a blade shape like that, what do you even call that? Is that a drop sheep foot? What is it? Who cares? It's a beautiful design. And I, for one, am actually very excited that they're no longer marked as discontinued. How long that will stay for, I'm not positive, but I do know that with the price drop, if you wanted one of these and couldn't afford the $350 price range that they were commonly sold in before, now's your chance. Whether you want full titanium or titanium with carbon fiber, go out and get you one. I'll link the Knife Center links down below for the pre-order where they have the most options, and I'll also link the Blade HQ links, which are not in pre-order, but they do have less options available. And I do highly suggest that if you really want one of these and you're capable of doing it, do it during the holiday season because it would be one hell of a gift to yourself or to somebody else. I don't think that you can go wrong with this. For those reasons and more, I don't think it should be any surprise that this gets a 9 out of 10 for fit and finish. Now finally, I'm not going to ask you to do the math because that's my job, it's not yours. People don't come to this channel to do math. If we add up all the scores, it got a 9 for materials, it got a 7 for ergonomics, it got an 8 for fidget, an 8 for the lock, and a 9 for fit and finish. If you add up all of those scores, you get a score of 41. 41 is Grail status. And you might be thinking, Rollshambo, what are you doing? How is this a Grail? How can you recommend this to everyone with that crazy design language? Hear me out. Everybody should have a knife that pushes the boundaries of what is considered normal. Even if it's not a knife that you would carry every day or use every day, it's a reminder of what's possible. It's a reminder that it's okay to be different. That different is not just okay, but it's also really good. I would love to have someone who thinks that this looks like a gas station knife actually hold this and then hold a gas station knife and tell me that they still feel the same way. Whether it's the M390 blade, the integral titanium, the smooth action, which is absolutely fantastic, or the design aesthetic, which draws you in like a kaleidoscope. This knife is absolutely a Grail. Is it a super high ranking Grail? No, but we also haven't reviewed one yet that goes over 41. I'm still waiting for that, and I'm excited to see if we someday get there and how many knives get higher than a 41. If you have a knife that you think can outscore this, that you think is honestly better, and you want me to rank it, make sure you hit me up. Email is in the description. Instagram's in the description. Let me know. In the meantime, I've got to get this back to its owner so that they can continue enjoying it. Because as much as I love it, I'm sure they love it too. Guys, that's all I got for you. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, boo-hoo, but there's a button for you too. And if you want to see more ranks, more Grail or garbage content, make sure you hit subscribe. I'm Rollshambo. I'll catch you on the flip side.